pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1854 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode today, I have a very interesting story that involves the state of Missouri in the U.S. and the state of Tasmania down in Australia. This story reminds me of those situations where somebody loses a dog. Maybe they move 3,000 miles away and they really miss their dog. They love that dog, but somehow they got separated and thought the dog was lost forever. And then, lo and behold, months later, a tired old dog drags into their yard. That dog tracked down that family because he loved that family too. In this case, the lost object is a Vietnam War Australian slouch hat. That's what they call those felt hats where they'd bend up the brim on one side. You could always tell an Aussie when you saw one of those. Recently, one of those hats from the Vietnam War was discovered in Missouri, and it's going to be sent back to the relatives of the Australian Vietnam veteran who wore that very slouch hat in Vietnam. This Australian slouch hat that was worn by an Australian Vietnam veteran by the name of Leslie Philip Connell was found in Warrensburg, Missouri. Can you imagine that? Warrensburg, Missouri? Warrensburg is a wonderful little town where the University of Central Missouri is located. It sits about 50 miles east of Kansas City. To me, more significantly, it's about 100 miles due south of Linneus, Missouri. That's where my good buddy, an extraordinary Vietnam veteran, Rick Scruggs, lives on a 100-acre farm up there. Rick is an amazing person. Most people his age would be retired, probably living down in Florida, playing golf all the time, taking it easy, but not Rick. Rick is actively engaged in his farm. Rick is an environmentalist. He loves the land. He raises fish in his fish ponds. He has dozens of acres of beautiful sunflowers. He also raises numerous cash crops, one of which is soybeans. That is another thing that makes this story significant to me. Other things that made this story interesting is that I had the great opportunity to go down to Australia on an R&R. Spent all my time in the city of Sydney because they were having unusual heavy rainfall at that particular time. Areas out in the countryside where I wanted to go were being flooded. I had it all arranged. I was going to go on a tour of a station down there. We call them cattle ranches up here. They call them stations. Unfortunately, I was not able to go out to that station because of the flooding. I still like Australia and the Australians, including Tasmanians. Now, you know why I find this interesting? There was a story written in the local paper about this Australian slouch hat, how it was located, and what's going to happen to it. The title of the story is Hat of Vietnam War Australian Veteran Found in Warrensburg, Missouri. The story was submitted by Sara Lawson. As you will see, it's a very interesting story. Let's take a look at it. Dateline, Warrensburg, Missouri. Across time and across the world, a military slouch hat found in Warrensburg belonging to an Australian veteran is making its way home. Finally, after all these years, that hat is going home. It seems that Nicholas Montgomery, a graduate student majoring in history at the University of Central Missouri, was browsing the selections at Those were the days store in downtown Warrensburg when he found a hat for sale. Montgomery admitted this. I am a bit of a collector, I suppose, of interesting hats. I'm not really from around here. When I heard the news there was a 3-story thrift store, I was just dying to go see it. Montgomery found the hat in part of a display in the store and recognized it as being from the Australian military. Thank goodness Montgomery was a graduate student in history. Many other shoppers probably just passed by that hat, not thinking anything about it. After purchasing the hat for $45 US, Montgomery found the name and serial number of Leslie Philip Connell of the Australian Army in the hat. Montgomery said this was the first time he had found an article of clothing with the full serial number and a still legible name. You do a little mathematics there and you'll realize that that name has remained legible for more than 50 years. Montgomery asked around in a Vietnam War reenactment group. They have such things? I think people who participate in Vietnam War reenactment groups are hard up to find something to do. I'll guarantee you, once you've heard the sound of bullets whizzing just a few feet above your head through the trees, going from your front to your rear, you really don't want to participate in any activities that reenact those sounds. It scares the you-know-what out of you, and I wouldn't want to repeat it again. Pardon me. If Montgomery likes to do things like that, more power to him. But count me out, please. Continuing. He talked to the people in his Vietnam War reenactment group, and it was suggested he contact the Australian Department of Veterans Affairs. The DVA assisted in finding Connell's service record. It was discovered that Connell served in the Vietnam War between 1969 and 1970 with the 131st Locating Battery of the Australian military. If you are not aware of what an Australian locating battery is, for the benefit of all my good friends down in East Palmdale, that happens to be a target acquisition unit, meaning they would go out and find targets for the artillery to shoot at. Could be a very exciting occupation. Continuing with the story, Montgomery said he wanted to return the hat to Connell, but sadly he discovered that Connell died in 2011. Here's where the story gets commendable on the part of Montgomery. After contacting the Australian DVA, Montgomery contacted the 131st Locators Association, looking into finding individuals Connell served with as well as his family. As it turned out, Connell's sister, Lynn Watson, was found. Watson lives in the island state of Tasmania, south of the Australian mainland. After making contact with Connell's sister, Montgomery said she is grateful to soon have her brother's hat returned. Montgomery speculated on how the hat found its way to Warrensburg, Missouri. Warrensburg just happens to be about 12,000 miles away from Tasmania. That hat traveled a long way. This is what Montgomery figures. My initial theory was, considering that Americans and Australians served together in Vietnam, that a lot of in-trading went on between the two, Montgomery theorized. My theory is that Connell most likely traded his hat for some other trinket from a U.S. soldier. Pardon me, but I hope Mr. Connell got more than a trinket from the U.S. soldier. He continued, not sure exactly how it ended up in Warrenton, Missouri, but alas, it's here. And from what the writer tells us, that hat will soon be down in Tasmania, back with the late Leslie Philip Connell's sister. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm sure it's going to mean a lot to Ms. Watson. Just for your information, there will be a picture of this slouch hat over at the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, episode 1854. I encourage you to go over and look at it. It is in amazingly good shape, considering how old it is and where it has traveled. I believe Mrs. Watson down in Tasmania is going to greatly appreciate getting this hat returned to the family. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1854 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these presentations. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?